welcome to the Data Swamp. We're glad to have you joining us again this week, and I want to welcome you as your host, Justin Small, along with my co-host, Wayne Cantwell. How you doing, Wayne?
Oh, good as always. Thank you. How's it going today?
Awesome. I'm doing great. And, I think this will be a good week to kind of build upon what we were talking about last week. We really talked quite a bit about dashboards, and we talked about kind of the business intelligence side of managing your data, right? Being able to prompt an action on a dashboard, and really how your data program can use all of these all of this focus and all of this management around how you're continuously improving, aligning around the customer, looking at business challenges. I think this time we're going to focus in a little bit more on the process, right? So how to build a BI roadmap and build a BI team, really to identify what data sources are the most valuable, and actually get on to building a data warehouse that will help enable your business intelligence strategy and really help you spearhead a successful business intelligence effort. So I'm excited about this topic. I think it'll be a really great one for us to dig into. But as always, before we dig into it, we're going to have a word from our sponsor, Tesh Global. So Tesh Global is a data management professional services firm with focused expertise on the most challenging, ugly problems in modern data integration, enterprise analytics and software development, and executive consulting. We have extensive experience in the areas of enterprise integration, enterprise business intelligence and analytics, and software application development in a variety of different industries, including healthcare, manufacturing, supply chain, retail, insurance, and more. And Tesh Global is headquartered in Grafton, Wisconsin. We have offices in Boise, Idaho, Mexico City, Mexico, and Amsterdam, Netherlands. And for more information, as always, you can visit www.teshglobal.com. Maybe 3 W's there, www.teshglobal.com. And we thank Tesh Global for their support of this podcast, The Data Swamp. So Wayne, this time we're going to talk about how you build an effective business intelligence program, right? How you spearhead a successful business intelligence program and really use it strategically to strengthen your business. And, in my opinion, establishing a strong BI strategy for your business, it's a thing everyone wants. It can be an extremely powerful thing if it's done correctly. But the key to getting it right really is having a complete strategy that kind of combines your historical BI with really forward-looking predictive analytics. And I think in this podcast episode, it'd be really great if we could kind of break down exactly how to develop that kind of BI strategy and how people can use it to strengthen their business. So without further ado, I think, my question is maybe more general at first, but what is BI and how do you think it can help someone's business?
BI is one of those topics that I think a lot of people misinterpret as the flashy eye candy, when really it can be a core component of any business, and it really drives a lot of the decision making. So it should be something that you not only center as your business focal point and decision making, but also keep pliable, because just as business changes, so does your metrics. And as those metrics change, it's very important to stay on top of those things. And that's exactly what business intelligence does. It is the real process of turning data into information, and then information into intelligent business choices. So that's kind of a cliche statement, if you will, but it's very true. It's what really drives businesses. And as you can see, getting from the data to intelligent choices and decisions being made based on that data is a process that must be dealt with. And once dealt with properly, I think it's got great value to any organization. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And we're going to talk about how we get there. And this is something that, holds near and dear um, value to me because I've been doing this for so long, for 20 plus years. And I've seen the good, bad, and ugly of it. So this is something that I think the audience will be, benefiting from. And I think it's a great topic to dig into.
Definitely. Well, let's dive into the specifics. So, I think first off, there's a whole lot to consider when it comes to creating and implementing a new BI strategy. But we've talked before this and kind of identified four main components, right? So you need to have a BI roadmap. You need to have your BI team. You need to find your data sources, right? And then you need to build your warehouse, right? So starting with that first one, your BI roadmap, right? At its core, I think BI is all about analytics and data, and that means you're going to need to have both of those things in order for you to have a strong overall strategy. And specifically, I think you need to kind of understand and organize your reporting and analytics needs, your industry KPIs, some custom KPIs meaning key performance indicators, things like historical data and even BI clients, those people who are going to be using your solution. So how do you kind of understand and organize all those things in order to create a good BI roadmap?
The roadmap is essential. It is one of those things that, similar to a project plan, once the project's done, the roadmap's useless. But it is the guidelines, and just like a project, it sets boundaries for what you anticipate on doing. And those boundaries should be really guided by a vision of what you anticipate things being. And just like a road map, there's going to be some terrain that you don't expect. There's going to be some things that come up that you just did not anticipate. There's the known, there's the unknown, and then the unknown, right? Mm-hmm. So as you traverse down the path of a BI roadmap, it's essential to have a driving force of what you anticipate and allow it to be flexible, allow it to be scalable, and anticipate those changes that you just plain could not see. So this is why it's important from a roadmap perspective to lay out a path for your team to follow. And that path really consists of what are your current KPIs? What do you have as indicators to drive your business? And then you pretty much go from that foundational, KPI level, and then to customized KPIs that you kind of discover along the way. They change. They actually are something that, if not changed, you could really be in trouble. I mean, you really need to keep track of indicators in your business that let you know if you're heading in the right direction or not. So those are some components, and those components are made up of your historical data, your current data that comes in every day, and then your anticipated data, right? How do you anticipate to scale? How does vendors interact with your data? And how are you able to do that on a consistently scalable basis so that you can then make decisions? So that's kind of the overview of the roadmap. And as we dig in a little bit deeper, we'll find that once you start to discover data and the sources of your data and how they integrate into your business, then you can start to actually do some measurements. And that's classically called KPIs, right? Your key performance indicators. So once those key performance indicators are defined, then you can start to build on them. And once they're set so that you can build on them, in other words, meaning there are certain measurements that you want as foundational, and then there are certain measurements that you're going to glean once you analyze the data. It's an iterative process, and this is something that an effective data warehouse and an effective BI roadmap really consists of, this idea of an iterative process that scales and grows.
Definitely. I think that's very wise that, you need to have an initial roadmap set out there, right? You really want your BI strategy to be comprehensive, right? And in order for that to work, you really have to start from the ground up and make sure you're not leaving out key components. But at the same time, there's a lot of research that goes into building a BI strategy and a BI roadmap, right? And like you're talking about with the KPIs, maybe you start out with some things that are just, core analytics to your business, right? Company-specific metrics that you need to keep track of. But you realize there's stuff out there in the industry, right? Maybe the industry that you're in has certain KPIs you're not using, right? And so you adjust the KPIs you're capturing to be able to reflect some of those. So, yeah, I like what you said. The roadmap is your initial vision, but then as you begin building out your BI capability using your roadmap, things change, and you need to be flexible as you learn, right? So I think that's great. At this point, we have a BI roadmap, right? And it goes without saying that BI involves a lot of work, which means you're going to need to make sure that you have a team built up to do that work, right? That can effectively organize their tasks, carry out the roadmap that you set out, and there are a few different BI roles that you need to incorporate into your business, and that doesn't mean you need 5 different people for each of those roles, but rather you should just make sure that someone on your team has the bandwidth and the skill to fill the shoes of those 5 roles. So the 5 we talked about are, the head of BI, right? BI developers, and data business analysts, DBAs, and data scientists. So do you want to break down some of those and kind of talk about what each one does and what their role is within the BI strategy?
Sure. One of the best things when you're trying to describe something that's, a little bit nebulous, right? These are things that change and morph and kind of take on their own life. And because I'm a technical developer / architect guy, and my background is such, I think it's best to start off by using a concrete example. So let's propose, and let's take the angle of we're a bank, okay? And let's say that we're going to build a BI roadmap, a BI team, data sources, data warehouse, and a solution that solves the banking industry problems, okay? So this will give us something to work with and give us a roadmap to traverse down and actually give you something tangible so that you can line it up with a real life situation. So that being said, I think the idea, if you were to look at it simply, you always want to start off with, what are we doing if there were no computers, right? If there was no computers, what are you in business for, right? And so the banking industry, it tracks monetary value. That's its core purpose. Now, when you add the element of computers to it, now you can do that with automation. Then when you add the advent of data and you add the advent of the internet, systems, enterprise applications, now you're starting to come around to, what we, typically think of as, an application or a data warehouse or a business intelligence, application. So with that being said, you need somebody to head up that business intelligence effort, and that comes with vision. That's somebody who's going to actually lay out the vision of what are we counting, who needs to see what we're counting, how often, all of those benchmarks that are out there that you're really trying to measure. So that's who really leads up the head of BI, who's going to make sure that when it comes to making a decision between 2 roads or 2 paths to go down, you really want that to be one individual, so you don't get into the situation where every decision becomes a 3-week meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's always good to have a stakeholder involved, and that stakeholder usually decides who that head of BI is to drive that vision. So that's the head of BI, somebody who's actually in charge, making sure that all of those business intelligence findings, developments, and then ultimately the implementation is done as per the vision was prescribed. So that's the head of BI. The BI developers, these are people who actually are application developers who actually get down into the nuts and bolts of it. And they actually create, through different pieces of software, the dashboards, the connectivity to data. They do a lot of the analysis on the data, meaning that is the data clean? Are we getting good data, good in format, valid, not duplicates? All of these things, these are pretty much things that the developers are actually digging into on a daily basis.
They're doing that ETL piece, right? Also.
Absolutely. They're usually on the back end of the ETL piece, but they drive it. The
Mm-hmm.
business developers are the folks who are saying, based on these business rules, here are the elements of data we need. And then we get to, the business analysts. Well, these are the folks who provide that list of KPIs, that list of here's the from an analyst perspective, columns, right? Here's the columns that we need to see on reports. And from a business intelligence developer standpoint, they look at it as elements of data. Okay, those are the fields that they're called. And then those data and business analysts decide, here's the things that we want to see, and the developer makes sure those things are available. So how does the developer make sure those things are available? They're talking to the DBAs, right? The database administrator. A database administrator is somebody who takes the huge hunk of data that's out there, right? That's being collected through all transaction systems. And then they make that data available, whether it be through a data warehouse, data marts, or data stores. And then that gets transformed into, actual information. And those information bits are then put together into intelligent dashboards. Those dashboards are what we call the storytelling machine, right? Those storytelling machines are easy to read, usually visible through charts. It could be graphs. It's often tabular in nature as well, so people can, see the spikes and then dig into those details that are in tabular format. So these are some of the components at the final stages, but it's all being developed by business intelligence developers who are being driven by data and business analysts who are being sourced by the DBA, right? So the DBA is the guy or gal who actually produces the raw data for the business intelligence developers to then cleanse, hone, and as you said, a lot of the ETL processes to make sure that data is ripe for graphing, if you will. And so those are the main components of it. And all along the line of that development, you're going to have a data scientist who's actually, again, looking at the data and making sure are you looking at the right KPIs? Is the data that you're actually producing clean enough to sort on, to roll up, to analyze from a granular perspective, meaning the details, the lowest level of details? These are things that the data scientist does in the background, and the data scientists are very important because these are the folks who find your new KPIs that I spoke of earlier. These are the folks that find trends in the data. These are the folks who actually see anomalies in the data so that they ensure that outliers, duplicates, and things like that don't skew the reports and don't actually interrupt the story that's being told from the dashboard. So again, if we were to look at this whole team, these are the key components that we identified for this conversation, but there's always the possibility of having more. So don't think of this as a cold and hard rule, but these are certainly some of the components that you'd have to have. And again, sometimes you're going to have additional roles on the BI team, but this should cover most of what you need from a development perspective.
And the point here, like you said too, Wayne, is not so much that these five roles are the end all be all roles, but what it's really pointing to is how important it is to have dedicated team members who are focused just on BI, right? Otherwise, you have your other employees and needing to split their time and trying to figure out whether they're going to do analytics or they're going to focus on more of the core of their position. And in those instances, BI always comes second, and that means that it's going to not be as good. It's not going to be done right oftentimes, or it will be done incompletely. And that's really true if no one in the company is holding anyone accountable to ensure that BI efforts are actually valuable and helpful to your business. So it's really important, regardless of the roles you have or the team that you build, that you have someone in upper management who's really supportive of building out a dedicated BI team and support system who can do this the right way. So, and Wayne, did you have anything to add to that? I heard you just come on.
Well, I just really wanted to, drive home what you're saying there. There's such an accountability when it comes to projects and developing, business intelligence systems that without, you're really going to develop something that doesn't have as much value, or you may be developing not as efficiently as possible. And I think it's important, look, I've done aside from the data scientist, I've done all of these roles, and one thing that's very important, and I think it's part of what you're talking about, is the separation of duties. It's very important to have folks who are dedicated to one aspect and making sure that that one aspect is done to 100% capacity in terms of competency, right? And that's why there's often teams that are being designed, and people will start projects where people are wearing 2, 3, 4 different hats, on a project. And I just don't see that being healthy. And I've had experiences where, if folks are playing 2 or 3 roles within a BI team, something's got to give. And so you're not going to get 100% from all of these different positions if you're not dedicated to one at a time. So I think that's a key thing to keep in mind is when it comes to accountability, make sure that you do have folks in these positions who are accountable for one specific goal, and it allows them to kind of concentrate on that and get it done. A lot of people think it's cheaper to have people, wear a couple hats, but I've found through my experience that it's actually the opposite. You end up doing a lot of rework, and things get thrown back in the cycle during testing time, all because we didn't have dedicated folks in these positions.
Sure, absolutely. So Wayne, we've got our roadmap, we've got our team built up. Now we got to figure out our data sources, right? And a lot of times businesses have data coming in from a lot of different places, and all that data has to be analyzed really comprehensively in order for you to have an effective strategy like we're talking about making, right? And so that means you're going to have to gather, and organize core data, peripheral data, external data, and those are all different types of data as far as what they mean to your business. So do you want to break down really quickly kind of some of the differences between, what's core data, what's external data, what's the peripheral data?
Absolutely. This is great because now we can go back to our analogy with the bank, right? So what's the core data? The bank takes in deposits. You've got money, right? So that's the core data. Those are the transactions that are the core data of that bank and that banking system. And that's the data they're going to be analyzing, transactions that come into their bank in the form of deposits, and then transactions that, monies go out of the bank in the form of people taking withdrawals. All right. So that would be the core,
Yeah.
right? Now you've got peripheral data. Peripheral data could be data that comes in from, let's say, credit card transactions from other banks. Okay. A lot of times, banking systems basically involve transactions from other banks on a higher level, meaning that there's banks that do business with other banks. This is another kind of data that has to be tracked and kept, incorporated into their data warehouse so that analysis can be done. So then you've also got data that's coming in from, let's say website information, right? There's transactions that are coming in that are, again, deposits and withdrawals. But what about the feedback from your customers, right? What if the customer says, I had a horrible experience at your ATM? Or, Sally really helped me out on Friday with a deposit that was a little difficult for me. That's all data that you want to capture as a bank. And so this is kind of a great example of core data and peripheral data. And then you're going to take in external data. So let's say, for instance, external data could be data that comes in from government, right? Governments have standards, and you might have to take in some of the standards and some of the laws and rules, and you've got data that's going to be massaged and manipulated based on, federal regulations. So there's a lot of this type of information that's coming into your bank, and you've got to process that information so that your core data and your peripheral data that is now being affected by this external data, or again, information, right?
Yeah.
And as this information manipulates your data, it now becomes intelligence that you're now using to make banking decisions, business decisions, but in this specific example, banking decision. So those are some examples of how, your data sources are going to be varied, and you're also going to have different formats of data. Of course, your core data may be, let's just say you're capturing data in an Oracle database. Okay, wonderful. Well, the peripheral data that may be coming from websites could be data that comes in an XML feed. Okay, and then when it comes to external data, this external data could be coming in terms of memos, flat files, rules or regulations that come in on an RSS feed, that all have to be accounted for and then integrated into your data warehouse. So these are great examples of how your data source is varied and has to be identified when you're trying to actually collect this data and then ultimately report off of it in a dashboard.
Definitely. Now, I think that baking example is really great. It brings some concreteness to kind of some of these concepts. And like you said, I think, you have all this data that's interdependent on each other. And it can be difficult to navigate that. So, to me, the first step here is really just figuring out what data sources you have, and what information is the most relevant from each of those sources. And then you can look at how to kind of integrate all those and begin to look at them comprehensively, which really brings us to our next point, which is the data warehouse, right? Once you know what your data sources are and you're deciding now on where you're going to put them, right? For most businesses, you think about a data warehouse or a data lake or some sort of centralized data store. The reason you do that is because you want one place to be able to look at all this in common. You don't want to have to go to a bunch of different places to look at this. And if you build your data warehouse or your data lake correctly, right, they can give you a really good view of your company's history, so that you can understand how your company's choices and the decisions you're making in your business are working, and how they're actually panning out, how your strategic decisions are panning out. But it's all about doing this part correctly, right? And data warehouses are really complex beasts, and they require a lot of care when it comes to building them out. So there are just some decisions you have to make, right? Decisions you make around the schema design and how you're going to host your data warehouse, right? Also, whether you're going to host it in the cloud or on your own infrastructure on premise, right? And how big you're going to make it, and things like concurrency. You know, how many users are going to be using it at once, and how many people are going to be looking at it from different angles. And then also a scaling aspect, right? How are you going to make it continue to be performant in order to deliver business intelligence as data and data types in that data warehouse increase? So let's talk about this a little bit, Wayne. You know, what are some of the real trade-offs and things to consider when it comes to analyzing some of these data warehouse characteristics?
Oh boy, data warehouse is another favorite topic of mine.
Mm-hmm.
This is really interesting because, you know, I've watched it evolve over time, and I've been able to be part of some great projects and some not so great projects, and even the ones that were considered to be not so great were actually great learning experiences, meaning that they may have taken a little bit longer. But what they have brought out was exactly what you just said, advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes, you know, data warehousing projects may take a little bit longer, but they provide so much more value. And so, again, let me go back into history. There's basically two types of approaches, and the technical folks out there can kind of glean from this exactly where I'm going. There's the Inman approach. And this was, you know, pretty much what all enterprises did. It was a top-down approach where, you know, we're going to collect all this data and then we're going to break it down into relationships, okay? And from that big, huge, normalized, you know, system, you know, you created dimensions and you modeled your data based on those dimensions. And then there came, you know, Kimball's approach, which was more relational and star schema. But it started off with the data marts having a relationship in the beginning rather than at the end. So these are kind of some of the
and hey, Wayne, I'm gonna interject here too, because there's another approach we're actually really excited about here at Tesh Global called the Data Vault approach. Which is a hub and spoke design approach that actually allows you to build out your data warehouse more scalably. And the reason it does that is by allowing you to centralize all of the keys on your business entities into hub tables, and then to be able to build out what are called satellite and link tables. The link tables define the relationships, and the satellites define the descriptive attributes. And that allows you to add and change your data warehouse without having to re-engineer it. Instead of having to change a bunch of things that you created previously in order to accommodate a new addition to the data warehouse, you can just kind of add it on, which makes it much easier to manage. So I just wanted to throw that one in the ring also, because we're really excited about it, and we're really excited about kind of the approach and the benefits it brings.
No, I think that's great. And actually what you're describing is Kimball's approach revised. It's a bottom-up approach. And the bottom-up approach allows you to really scale things because it's from the bottom up, meaning that you take the details and with those details, you actually create keys, you create links that can have other links. So that's the whole kind of spoke and hub type of design that can go on because one spoke can be surrounded by a hub, and that hub can then have several more spokes that create several more hubs. It's a really scalable approach that all gets tied back and is driven by a central warehouse of keys rather than a relational database being driven by the values that are inside of the data it is driven by keys that actually reference the data. So that's a great point. And that's one of the things about the changing and evolving sources of data. And this is why columnar data and a lot of the newer approaches to data are being based on keys, not the actual data value. And what I mean by that, just very simply, if we were to look at, again, the banking data, you as a banking customer have a unique banking ID. And so that banking ID traverses all of your transactions, whether it be in the bank or online. So this is how that banking ID is tied to your data. Well, in the past, that banking ID is what was unique. And now, when you have a data vault design, that banking ID now becomes a key. That key becomes referenced in a separate database. So what you essentially have is a database of the database. Now, what's great about this type of design is that you're now able to traverse the database of reference rather than the actual database. This is what allows people to query a database without doing what's called a table scan. You don't have to go through all of the physical data to actually get an answer. You're actually going through a smaller subset of data, which is a reference data. That reference data then connects to the actual data only once you've made all of your declarations. This is so much more efficient. So these are some of the types of databases that, are changing how we query it. And we can dive in a little bit deeper in terms of that transition, because what sparked all this stuff, Well, I'll tell you, it all on the mainframe. And the mainframe has a persistent connection, whereas nowadays we have what's called client-server. Client-server means you only have a non-persistent connection. You go across to the server, you make a transaction, and you bring it back. This is how the World Wide Web works. Every time you type in a URL, you're typing in a value, and it doesn't bring back you the entire website when you're searching through Google. If you think about it, when you do a search through Google, Google has indexes of all the different actual websites in their database. So it's a database of databases, right? And so this is why Google is so efficient. It uses a reference database, and then once you've decided, yeah, there's the website I want, and you click on it, then you actually bring up the website you want, as opposed to perusing through every single website. That's not what Google wants to do. So there's an example of how it's being used at a 30,000 foot level. So you can actually see why it's more efficient to use databases like the data vault structure. Very important to kind of understand these concepts before you actually get involved in developing them, because these are the exact components being used in the newer cloud databases that are out there. It's really a database of a database, because you only have connectivity points rather than a consistent connection to a server. So these are all things that are really allowing, the new enterprises to scale and do things that are not only scaling functionality, but it allows you to do these things from anywhere on the planet, as long as you've got an internet connection. So this is why I think it's important to understand the star schema design, cloud versus on-prem, right? And these are all affected by database size, database structure, the scalability of your database, and how about, backup, restart, recovery? What happens when these things go down? These are all things that you have to keep in mind. And so if we go back to our banking example, it's pretty important to make sure folks know exactly what their balance is, even if a system goes down.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think, focusing really on these four things that we talked about, right? The roadmap, the team, the data sources, and building out the data warehouse or the data lake, right? That's the first step to really, those are, focusing on those is really the first step to, getting your comprehensive and your useful BI strategy and business intelligence effort set up for your business, right? Really what we did here is just kind of provide a 10,000 foot overview of kind of what you need to start out with a good BI, how to spearhead a good BI effort. But we will go more in depth into some of these topics in future podcasts. So I'm excited about that. And so Wayne, I appreciate you joining. And this I think was a great discussion. Hopefully it was useful to the listeners, and would help them get started if they're thinking about starting out on a business intelligence strategy. So hope you all have a great rest of your day, and thanks for joining, Wayne.
Absolutely. Have a good one. You be good.